Everybody has a story. Maia, where are you from? Tell me about your childhood growing up. You had both parents?
Yes, I was blessed to grow up with both my parents. I was born in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, in Canada, where it's very cold. And we had a pretty good and adventurous upbringing. It was a very cold winter in 1997. I believe it got down to minus 45. And my parents just said, screw it. It's too cold here. And my mom found my dad a job in New Zealand. And so our family of six moved to Aotearoa, New Zealand in 97. And we've been here ever since.
You have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I've got a younger brother and an older brother and an older sister as well. And my dad, actually, he has another daughter. She's quite a bit older than me, and we've been in touch over the past few years, and we've actually talked about meeting and sort of catching up in a country somewhere, which will be quite cool. Yeah, to sort of meet and get to know my other sister.
So this is before your dad met your mum?
Yeah.
Cool. So can you tell me about the first time you did a tag-along with your dad?
The first one I can remember would have to be when he was skiing along Lake Superior. So he had kind of like a sled that you see the ski patrollers carry people down on the mountain. He had one of those, and I remember being maybe 3 years old, and he sort of, packed me into the sled all nice and warm, and I just remember being sort of all huddled up, and I could feel the sled sort of going all over the bumps and over the ice. And that was the first adventure that I can remember, like the earliest tag along that we did with my dad.
What made it memorable?
It definitely would have been the cold, and my view was literally just the sky and sort of the back of my dad skiing across the lake. I think I was just kind of going, what are we doing and where are we going? But it would have been probably just one of those cases of him wanting to go out on an adventure and spend time in nature, but I was his little buddy, and so he took me along and thought I'll just pack her into the sled and drag her along.
Cool. What were some of the most challenging moments you faced during your adventures with your dad?
There's a lot. But I would have to say moments where he had me ice climbing, like up a waterfall, and I wouldn't want to go anymore, and I would just kind of scream down at him or start crying or something, and he would just, he's like, I can't do anything. You're just going to have to figure it out. And I'm freezing and my hands are going numb, and I just, it's kind of those moments where I did really just have to get over myself and figure it out. And he wouldn't let me come down because I'm on the rope, and he would say, "You're not coming down, so you got to keep climbing up." So, so moments like that where I guess at the time it was difficult having to accept that I didn't really have a choice. But it also taught me a lot of important lessons, of overcoming adversity and getting over not letting my emotions and fears get in the way of completing something. But yeah, there's many other moments similar to that where you just have to learn the hard lessons by experiencing them and being in them out in the elements.
Do you have any rituals or traditions before setting out on any of these adventures?
Yeah, I guess the rituals were always to check our gear. So it was more like a routine where the night before we would lay out all of our gear, and you do it with someone so that they can kind of double check that you've got everything. Especially if you're sharing the gear, you got to make sure that, someone's got the cooker, or, someone's got the GPS and that kind of thing. So, the first thing would be to lay out all the gear on the floor, and then you put them into your bag one at a time. And packing your bag for, say, like a mountaineering expedition or a climb there's an art to it, because it's like playing Tetris, and you have to pack your bag a certain way so that it's convenient to get everything out, but you also have to think about what's going to be at the bottom of your bag, probably the least important things, and carefully pack each thing, and then reduce as much weight as possible. All the way down to like cutting your toothbrush in half and things like that to so that it doesn't take up so much space. And as for other sort of like rituals, I guess I always had this thing where we would be doing a climb or something, and I would get to a stage where I was really tired, and I would stop and I'd have a sook. And I'd just start crying. And then my dad would kind of go, here it is, and he would just sit, and he'd be really patient. He'd just let me let it out. And then he'd say, are you done? And then I'd say, yep. And then we'd keep going. And yeah, that was one thing that happened every single time. I'd always have to have that little breakdown to sort of, I think we all kind of do that, but don't feel safe enough to express it. So I was really blessed to actually have that safe space to just be like, I don't want to do it anymore. And then, he'd be like, yeah, you do. You just got to get over this little moment. Yeah, a lot of those little breakdowns were at night at maybe like 2 a.m. under the stars. And I would sit back in the snow like I was in a big lazy boy chair, and I'd just look up to the sky, and then I'd have my cry, and then I'd realize, like, holy shit, there's not many people that get to do this. And then I would sort of, be really grateful for being there and go like, all right, let's do this thing, and then continue on. So yeah, that's probably the other non-negotiable that would happen.
Cool. Sounds like you had a real good rapport with your dad.
Yeah. We've built a pretty cool relationship and a really cool bond over the years. We have a reciprocal understanding of each other where we don't actually really need to talk. Like, he'll give me a look, and then I'll give him a look, and then it's like, oh, yeah. Yeah, and I've always wanted to do the Amazing Race with my dad. I just thought it would be quite entertaining. But I think most of the time we would end up just shaking our heads at each other, like looking at the way other people do things.
Yeah, it's
not judging, but because we both have a very logical way of going about things, that it's one of those, it's kind of an inside joke with us when we see people making things look way harder than they actually are. So I guess that's like sort of a gift I picked up from my dad, but
that's cool. That's cool. What lessons about life or resilience did you learn from doing these adventures with your dad?
The main thing that I've learned, the lessons that I've learned while being out in the elements relate to our general life. So, the mountains are so unpredictable, the weather, the environment, you never know when something is going to turn or something's going to change. And you only have control over what you know. You only have control over yourself, your emotions, and the knowledge that you have when you go out to these unpredictable places. So I always make sure that I pay attention when my dad's teaching me something because I know that it's for a purpose and I might not have to use it straight away, but there might be a situation like, say, an avalanche goes off, and my knowledge of where I'm camping, it's going to be something that he taught me. Like, make sure when you camp on a mountain, you're not underneath this big cliff face that can just break off. You got to find a space that is sheltered but out of the way so that you're not in the avalanche trail, It's like something simple like that, but he might be just telling me while we're walking. And, anyone else might just be like, yeah, but I'm making sure that I'm taking it all in,
Yeah.
And we might not be aware of it at the time, but if I'm in that space on my own, then I'll make sure that that information comes back to me and I know how to read the land and read the weather and the wind and know how to set myself up so that I'm in the best situation possible. But at the same time, I don't have complete control over that. So that's what's it called? Calculated risk. There's only a certain amount of control that you have over your environment.
Was there a particular adventure that holds a special place in your heart?
Yes, and that would be, or I guess a place, and that would be Aoraki, Mount Cook, because we have unfinished business. We attempted to climb it a few times, and each time we would get to a certain place and have to turn back due to weather or other circumstances. And as a young, I was only 12 at the time, and 14 the last time that we tried. But it's quite a hard lesson to accept when you're a really young person, especially when you're so close and you kind of just have to suck it up and go like, yep, you put all this effort in, but it's not safe. Is it worth, continuing if it's going to put your life at risk? Like the first time we went down and tried it, we got 300 meters from the summit. And my dad looked out onto the horizon and he said, see that cloud that's coming in right now? And it was some cirrus cloud, which usually means that there's going to be a storm within 4 to 6 hours-ish, depending on the wind. And it was like clear blue sky, right? And I'm just like this 12-year-old kid. I'm like, what do you mean? It's right there. Like, let's just run up, And he's like, it's not that easy, kid. We gotta head out. But right before that moment, we were coming over a big, it's called a serac. It's sort of like a big piece of ice that's hanging over, and right beneath it was a big crevasse that just like goes forever. And I had to climb up over it, and I was literally hanging from my ice axe. And as I was climbing along the edge, it was getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and I just had my crampons and ice axe like holding on for dear life. And it took us a long time to get over that part, so we somewhat wasted a lot of time. And then that sort of cost us the summit. So, yeah, so we had to turn around and and head back. And then, sure enough, we got back to the plateau, onto the hut, and 45 minutes later, there was gale force winds outside, and you could feel the hut lifting up. It's cabled down to the rock. You could feel it like lifting up. And literally, if we needed to go to the toilet, you just had to hold it because you had to walk out to the long drop. And everyone's just sitting there like, nah, I'm not going out. We had to wait hours and hours for this storm to pass. But if we continued, because it would have taken us another 2 hours, even just to go that little way, we would have been stuck in the middle of it on the glacier. So, that's the lesson learned there.
That wouldn't have been fun.
No. But, then we thought, well, we'll try again. This time we went down. The weather was so bad at Mount Cook, so we decided to go over to Mount Aspiring instead. So we summited Mount Aspiring, and I was 12 at the time as well. And that was a big mission. Lots of memories from that one. I remember I met this woman, Amanda, and her toenails had all fallen off.
Really?
Yeah. And I thought that was cool when I was, I was like, I want to be like her. Like that's hardcore. But yeah, that trip stood out a lot for me as well, because we had to camp out overnight on the glacier, and it's like dead silent, and then all of a sudden you hear this big like crack of thunder. It's not a storm though; it's an avalanche is going off at night, and you just kind of hope and pray. You're like, don't hit us, And and of course it's cold, so we're like huddled up in the tent, and then you only get like a few hours sleep, and then the alarm goes off at 1 a.m. and you just think, God, why do people do this? But as soon as you start, and all you can hear is your crampons in the ice and nothing else, and just like those stars in the sky, I think a lot of people just like, they look at the stars, but when you're up that much higher, you can see the layers behind the layer that we can see down here at sea level. The higher you go up, the more you see, and you just see shooting stars every second. And it's just like the most incredible thing. And it's so quiet, and so it might suck to get up at that time, and it's freezing cold, and you've just been sleeping on hard ice, but as soon as you start off, it's a different kind of adrenaline that kicks in, and you just forget about everything, and you're like, oh, this is what it's about.
This is cool.
Yeah, and you watch the sun come up there, and meet other parties on the way as you're climbing.
Yeah, that sounds like hard work to me, Maia.
Yeah.
2003, I can remember reading an article in the newspaper about 4 Latvian climbers they'd found dead on Mount Cook. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, because we were the ones that found the bodies. So that was the last attempt of climbing Mount Cook, and my dad actually wasn't with me on that trip. I did it with a friend, and her father was also a doctor, and 2 of his buddies. So there was 5 of us, and I remember we were camping out at Cinerama Col, which is a spot up on Mount Cook if you climb in. So we had climbed in, and it's sort of this little saddle where it's nice and flat, and you can camp up there safely. So we were camping there, and I remember we saw them leaving at about 2 in the morning. You could see their headlamps heading up the glacier, and her dad actually mentioned that the time that they were leaving would mean that the spot that they were going to get to was going to be quite dangerous because of the time of the day that it was. So we were about 3 or 4 hours behind them. And I remember we were we were climbing along, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and Tara, my friend who was with me, we looked over to the left, and we saw all this gear, all this climbing gear, and like a sleeping bag and everything all scattered over the Linda Glacier. And we thought, oh, someone's camp must have blown away because they must have been camping up higher on the mountain. And it also looked like there was all this rope coiled up on the ice. And we were about 50 meters away. And we sort of kept climbing, kept going, but we kept sort of looking back and wondering, I wonder where camp was or whose stuff this is. And we all just had this feeling. And what happened was we actually got to the exact same spot where my dad and I had to turn back when I was 12. And my friend's father just said, you know what, I think we need to go and check it out. And in my head, I was like thinking, no, like we're right there again. Come on, like. But I also had this feeling, that something wasn't right, and I also had a really bad pain down my shins, and it was from the climb in the previous day. But I just didn't want to be a complainer, so I just kind of sucked it up. But it was like really bad, really sharp pains in my shins, and so we had turned around and we started to come back, and then we went to check out what the stuff was, and her dad went over, and then I saw him look, and then he kind of like looked down like this, and my heart just sank, and I was like, oh God. And so what it was there's 4 climbers, and if you have even numbers, you would have 2 on one rope and 2 on another rope and climb separately. If you have uneven numbers, you would have 3 max on one rope and 2 on the other, say if you had 5. But they had 4 people on one rope, which, was kind of hard to believe because they were really experienced climbers from Latvia, but they just made a silly decision, and one of them would have fallen, and they fell on this place called the Gun Barrels, and 3 of them were tangled up like in a ball basically in the rope, and one of them had broken off, and that's what we thought was the sleeping bag from the distance, but that was the other climber that had broken off. And and all their gear and stuff was everywhere, and what I thought was the coiled rope was actually blood smeared down the ice, so it was quite graphic. But I think at the time, we were so young, we were kind of using, I don't sound like really insensitive, but we were kind of using like humor, I think, as a coping mechanism, because I picked up this video camera that came from their stuff, and I ended up carrying it down, but I was like, maybe the footage is on here, and me and Tara were going like, we'll try and turn it on and see what happened and stuff. And I ended up carrying the video camera down because, there might have been evidence on there, but her dad said, oh, we have to go down and report this. So on our way back, we continued, and then I remember I stepped through the ice. There must have been a crevasse underneath the snow. I stepped through, and then I let out this like shriek because of my leg, and it was so painful. And then her dad, who's a doctor, he said, like, what happened? I just said, oh, I've just been having this pain, but I haven't said anything. And he just said, take your boot off. And I took my boot off, and the rubbing, I had tape, like, you tape your shins and stuff like that. The corners of the tape were literally like embedded underneath my skin, and the tendon on my shin was like so worn through that he said if I had continued carrying that weight and like continued for maybe even another 2 hours, I probably wouldn't walk properly again because I would have snapped the tendon because there was so much strain on it and I had worn it down. And so I was like, oh, shit, okay. And so then he said, you can't carry your pack now, so someone else had to carry my bag. So then I felt like useless, because I was just sort of, I don't like being a burden or whatever, but that was the reality of it. So then we made our way back to the hut, and then me and Tara flew back down to Mount Cook Village, and we had to wait there. And then the woman at the dock center she was sort of like babying us, and I remember saying to her, like, there's just people that died up there. It's not a big deal to us. That's just what happens. And she like looked at me, because I'm just this kid. And she's like, oh, yeah, okay. Do you want like a hot chocolate or something, sort of trying to comfort us. But I think we were just still sort of in shock. And again, just sort of a coping mechanism to sort of,
Yeah, that could be seen as wisdom ahead of your years as well, eh? Because that's the sort of, it's just a matter of fact.
Yeah,
what are you going to do about it? So it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's happened. Let's move forward. You don't want to go dwelling on what about this? What about that?
Yeah. And that's something that my dad prepared me for very early on. Because later in the years when I've, gone to therapy or gone to a counselor or something, and they bring things up from the past, and I start talking about this, and then they go, oh, that must have affected you so much. And then my answer is always like, no, I don't, it didn't really, like, that's just part of it.
They'd be thinking, what a cold bitch.
Yeah.
Hey,
yeah. But because my dad prepared me for it, like the reason I got into, I didn't say this earlier, but the whole reason I wanted to get into the mountaineering and stuff is because I followed Sir Edmund Hillary quite a lot when I was young, and I just thought that he was so cool and climbed Mount Everest and everything. And then there was this thing called the Seven Summits, and a few people had done it around the world. The youngest person was 18, and I wanted to be the youngest female. And so when I was 11, that was what I said. And the first thing that my dad said to make sure that I was serious was like, well, if you want to do that, you got to be fit and you got to be strong. So when you can do 50 push-ups and 10 pull-ups, then I'll take you out and we'll see how you go. Because that's what they have to do to get into the Army. So every day I rolled out of bed straight into my push-ups, straight onto the pull-up bar in the living room until, it was about a month or two. And then I was like, Dad, look, I can do these. And so then for him, he was like, all right, I gave her the task and she did it. So,
it wasn't like he was like, oh, Christ, now, now what have I got myself into?
Yeah, exactly. So the next one, he took me up Ruapehu and was teaching me some skills, and we climbed to the summit up there on like a beautiful sunny day. And then, the next one we went and did Narahoe.
Isn't there an easy way up to the summit?
Yeah, there's lots of different ways, but the easiest is pretty much like straight up the...
This is going up to the Crater Lake, is
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like lots of tourists walk up to the Crater Lake?
Yeah.
But so what you're saying is you and your dad have found a hard way to get up there.
Well, we...
Not for you, the normal track?
Oh, no, I don't know. There's lots of, it just depends on the conditions. So in the summer, you just walk straight up the rock, and it's pretty straightforward. In the winter, if there's lots of ice and you've got crampons, you can go straight up the ridge, or you can go straight up the middle as well. But if there's been snow, you don't want to go up that bit because that whole face can avalanche off. So, and these are the things of like reading the land and the conditions where a lot of people don't know how to do that. They haven't been taught, especially when there's fresh snow up there and all these ski bums are like, oh yeah, we'll hike up and then we'll, ride down this part, and then they get stuck in an avalanche because they don't have any knowledge of, how to read the conditions. So even though Ruapehu is a pretty friendly mountain, there's still aspects of it that can be really, really risky and really dangerous.
Did your dad have any sayings, advice, or habits or stuff like that stuck with you during any of your outings?
Yeah, one of his little sayings that stuck out for me was that, or like I guess a quote, was that while he was growing up, people would always, scrutinize or say to him like, "Why are you always out in the mountains?" Or, "What is it that makes you want to climb a mountain? Why do you climb mountains?" And he would say, "Because you don't," or "Because people like you don't," right? And so now I say that. Because people kind of say like, "Oh, you're nuts. Why do you go up and climb in those crazy conditions and this?" And I go, "Because you're not there."
Yeah, cool.
Because it's a beautiful way to get away from just other people's energy that's draining, but it's also a place where you can reflect on that. Yeah, so I guess it's a nice way to escape the realities of society and your expectations and all that sort of thing. And it's just a nice way to have time and space to yourself to process things in a healthy way. A lot of people have their vices where they'll grab a drink or they'll turn to drugs or gambling or unhealthy vices, I would say, or addictions. But for me, I believe that going out to the mountains or into nature is a really healthy and safe way to deal with, trauma or things that need addressing, because you have that quiet time and space. I don't play music when I go out into nature. I just like to listen to the birds and sounds of the river and the rocks. The rocks do speak, and yeah, you're forced to be present the whole time, because if you make one wrong step, that could be the end of it. So it forces you into living in the present, and then when thoughts come through, it's just you and your consciousness, really.
How do you think those experiences shaped your relationship with your dad and your perspective on the outdoors?
I think the experiences shaped our relationship in a way that he knows that he can basically rely on me for anything, because he's had to rely on me to like hold his life in my hands, and vice versa. I don't think there's anybody else in my life that I trust more than my dad's word. And it's also shaped me in a way that my expectations of people, I guess, have kind of, affected my life, not always in a positive way, because I've had this person who's been extremely reliable and will always do what he says and, sticks to his word. So when I'm met with someone that doesn't, then I kind of go like, "What's wrong with you?"
Yes.
Like he set the bar high for me.
That's what I can say. Yeah.
But I think that's important. It just means that I'm not going to settle for anything less, really, which, it has been challenging throughout my life and in certain relationships and whatnot. But I do see it as a great positive, and I have also taken on those attributes because I'm a person of my word, and when I say I'm going to do something, I will always do it. Sometimes if something happens and I'm not able to do it straight away, it's still there, and I know I'm going to do it, just like I'm going to finish Mount Cook.
Yeah.
It's unfinished business, and
That's integrity, eh?
yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, that's definitely, I guess, shaped who I am as well. And so I'm, extremely grateful to have a father that has so much integrity. And, I think something I also got from him is, I think I briefly spoke on it earlier, is how to process and calculate risk basically in your head. We don't need formulas or literature of sorts. We can kind of like look at something and sort of calculate in our head, yeah, that's a bad idea. Or yeah, that would work, And he has one of those amazing super brains where he can, like he does the arborist work now, and he was a rigger by trade, and he can just look at something and he'll make the calculation in his head. And whenever he's taking a tree down, I'm like, are you confident? And do you think it's going to work? And he's like, I hope so. But he always has that doubt that like it might go wrong, but he has so much trust in himself and his skill,
Confidence.
and he's so confident on the outside, but I know that on the inside he's still shitting himself sometimes, but as we all do. But you have to have that confidence to, to get anywhere in life. And yeah, I guess my perspective of the outdoors, I just spoke on it before, it's like therapy. It's a safe way to go out and process things, to be with your thoughts. Whenever I go on bushwalks or I'm in the mountains and I see people with their little speakers and stuff, I'm like, God, turn that shit off. We're not out here to listen to that.
Do that at home.
Yeah, do that at home. We're out here to actually like connect, because when you have that, you're not present. When you're in the mountains, you take one wrong step and that's it. It forces you to be present with your physical and also with your thoughts and everything. So
It'll be the same, I guess, with a lot of the outdoor activities or adventures that we all go on, eh?
Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself passing on what you've learned from those adventures with others?
Yes, especially now with the retreats that I run. I've made them specifically so that we have an outdoors element, because I think teaching people about how to relate our real life situations to being in the outdoors and being in the unpredictable elements, there's certain aspects of it that can directly relate to our journey in life. Everyone wants to be at the top of the mountain. No one wants to do the climb, so it's teaching people how to love the process, teaching people how to get over their fears and overcome things. Because when you're out there, and for example, on one of our retreats, it was a beautiful day, but the wind was so strong, and wind can be really intimidating. There's something about it that just makes you there's something about the wind that makes you really uncomfortable, but you're out in the wilderness and you're in between, the hut and the car park. There's hours between both. So what are you going to do? Just stop and like do nothing? You have to persevere. You have to keep going. And so when we do that day in the outdoors, it's nice to go back to the lodge and then we reflect on it. And it's really cool to hear the stories of the women or the students and what they were experiencing in their minds in those moments. And everyone experiences it differently too. But at the end, we all end up at the same destination. So, I think there's some really important lessons that we can learn by being in the outdoors. And yeah, it's like how we, created that program for the adventure therapy. It's for everybody. So
I've enjoyed hearing this particular chapter of your life, Maia, and it's been great to see how the influence of your dad seems to have shaped who you are. And I look forward to hearing what comes next.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait.